we can reclaim our divinity once again. But for us to know our divinity, we must also know thyself. As the ancient Egyptian proverb tells us, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whosoever shall know himself shall find it. And this is because we are all ethereal beings, but we have forgotten this. So before we can unlock and understand the meanings within all the symbolism, we must first know who we are. This is where the key of the tarot, along with the newly uncovered knowledge from ancient Egypt, help us to reveal the truth that has been hidden for so long. To begin to know ourselves, we must once again think to the Fibonacci sequence and remember that everything expands and grows using this sequence along with sacred geometry. When we use this universal sequence of numbers and the golden mean spiral, along with the tarot, we begin to see this hidden information revealed. Everything in our universe births, expands, and grows using this blueprint. When we look further into the golden mean spiral, we can see it is divided into sections. When we correspond these golden mean sections to the major arcana in the tarot, we begin to understand the evolution of our souls and our true divinity. However, before we start down the path of the tarot and begin to unravel their secrets, let's first get a bit of history to this key that has been left to us. The tarot's original author is unknown. It is also uncertain as to exactly where and when the tarot came into existence. But it is believed that it originated in ancient Egypt about 3,500 years ago and was brought to Europe by the Rom or Gypsies as they travelled to Europe from India. Due to the increasing religious intolerance of the Antichrist Catholics and their attempts to suppress esoteric knowledge and sacred truths from humanity, the Magi who were in possession of this sacred knowledge were forced to encrypt these secrets into the tarot cards to keep this ancient wisdom safe from manipulation and destruction. The tarot was devised using the principles of the Kabbalah, but we can also see symbolism from ancient Egypt, the runes, astrology, and numerology. And they also equate to the chakras and color symbolism. The tarot consists of a deck of 78 cards in total. This is made up of 22 major arcana cards numbered from 0 to 21, and the minor arcana consist of 56 cards. However, it is the major arcana cards that we will focus on to help us decode this hidden information. So now we have an understanding of the importance of the tarot, and that they are not just some novelty for telling fortunes, as we have been led to believe. So let's now look at the first card. The first card is the 0 card, and not only does the 0 card represent the beginning of the major arcana in the tarot, but it is also the first number of the Fibonacci sequence. This card number 0 equates to the Fool and represents Orion, the location for the God consciousness of our material realm. We can see this also in the Visconti tarot cards that surfaced around the 15th century. On this card, you can see a clear depiction of Orion with his club and feathers in his hair. We see that the Rider-Waite tarot card also shows the Fool with a feather in his cap. And if we look at ancient constellation maps, we see that Orion is depicted with a club and once again feathers in his cap. These feathers, as with the feather that is placed on the scale to be weighed against the heart in the ancient Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony, are symbolic of the godlight of Orion. Some feathers, like peacock and duck feathers, display their color with a process called structural coloring instead of pigment. Structural coloring is where the cellular structure of the feather, or as with the shells of scarab beetles, are actually formed in a way where they refract wavelengths of light to create their color. So once again, we see this connection to changing angles of light also contained within this symbolism. This is where the term feather in your cap originates from. This term was used to describe a great achievement or special honor. And of course, for those whose hearts are equal in weight to the feather, that is a great achievement and special honor indeed, for they are rewarded with the highest consciousness in Zep Tepi, or Aru, the field of reeds, as the ancient Egyptians described their Garden of Eden. We must pay attention to some of these old sayings, as they are actually remnants of truths that have managed to survive. Now, when we look to the Kabbalah tree of life, we see that the very top Sephirot is also connected to Orion and the Fool card. This Sephirot is called Kether, which means crown. It is also interpreted as both the topmost and regal crown. Just like the crown chakra, it sits above the head and is not a part of the body. And this is also why it is known as the crown, because a crown is worn above the head. The symbol of the crown is also seen in many alchemical drawings of the male and female twin souls, and is symbolic of the reuniting with God consciousness, and thus being crowned. This is why royalty wears crowns, as they are emanating this crowning of God consciousness. However, they are nothing but mere frauds that took the opportunity to enslave the masses and crown themselves. All of the other Sephirot below the crown are likened to the body, which starts with the head, depicted by Chokmah and Binah, with Daleth symbolic of the third eye chakra directly located in the middle. The third eye is also related to the pineal gland, if we are to take the perspective of this area in the physical and not the ethereal body. Daleth is also called the door, or the door of the tent, and is symbolic for this energy point being the gateway to God consciousness, which is located at the crown. If we look to Hindu mythology, we see that they saw the third eye chakra as a gateway, for they believed that the spiritual energy from the external environments could enter their body through this gateway, and hence they take the utmost precaution in protecting it with spiritually positive protecting forces. From this point in the Kabbalah tree, it descends downwards until it reaches the root chakra that equates to Malkuth. But the symbolism on the Fool card is not only symbolic of Orion, our God consciousness. It is also symbolizing the potential soul before it has been birthed into existence and splits into twin souls of male and female. Once again, if we look to Kether on the Kabbalah tree of life, it represents the primal stirrings of intent in the Ein Sof. Ein Sof in Kabbalah means God prior to his self-manifestation. And this is because God manifests a part of himself within the souls that are birthed onto the material realm. It is also said that Kether is so sublime, it is called in the Zohar the most hidden of all hidden things, and is completely incomprehensible to man. This is once again speaking of God, for what else but God can be so incomprehensible to man? On the card we see the Fool is being depicted in the ethereal, walking towards the cliff's edge in innocence, completely unaware that he is about to be manifest onto the material realm below. In his pack, he is holding the unknown potential of the souls. We see this is also connected to Kether in that it contains all the potential for content, though it contains no content itself, and is therefore called nothing. And we know the number 0 also equates to nothing. The soul's purity is also symbolized by the white flower. At this point, as the number 0 and Kether symbolizes, they are still only just a potential in God's consciousness, for they are not yet manifest. The white sun is symbolic of the galactic core Atum, and the dog is representing Sirius, or Canis Majoris, which is also called the dog star. In ancient times, the season following the star's appearance came to be known as the dog days of summer, and coins retrieved from the island of Chios in the Aegean Sea from the 3rd century BC feature dogs or stars with emanating rays highlighting Sirius's importance. Orion's belt also points to the brightest star in the sky, and that star is Sirius. Orion's belt and Sirius also line up with significant locations of ancient sites around the world. We see this with the Hopi Mesas that lines up with Orion's belt, and then we see Sirius correlating to the Chaco Canyon. In Mexico City, the Street of the Dead lines up with Orion's belt, and Sirius correlates to the largest pyramid complex in the world, Cholula, the Great Pyramid of the Sun. In Egypt, we see that Orion's belt lines up with the 3 pyramids of Giza, and Sirius lines up to Heliopolis, which is one of the oldest cities in Egypt, and also known as the City of the Sun. So we can see that Orion and Sirius are definitely related to each other and have an important connection. So it is not surprising we see the symbol for Sirius in the form of a white dog on the Fool card. In the other symbolism of the card, we see the ice and the sun, symbolic of the polarity of God's infinite energy. For energy is always equal in polarity of positive and negative. That is what gives energy its force and momentum. Let us move on to the next 2 cards, for these are the cards that give us the first glimpses into the truth of who we really are. And that truth is, we are much more than our physical containers. We are ethereal beings first and foremost. The following 2 cards are card number 1, the Magician, and card number 2, the High Priestess. Now, if we look to the Fibonacci sequence, what all growth and expansion in the universe is based upon, we can see how these 2 cards relate to the following 2 numbers in this sequence, which are 1 plus 1. When we look where these 2 numbers are located in the golden mean spiral, we see that although they are separate, they are still contained together in the first golden mean section. This is symbolic of the soul birthed into existence from the consciousness of God, represented by 0, and splitting into male and female upon its manifestation into existence. The ancient Egyptians refer to this in their texts as when he was 1 became 3. If we also look at the red line within the golden mean spiral, we see it begins at the corner of this first golden mean section containing these 2 numbers. Also note that the line touches only 3 sides of the first section, showing us the first representation of the Trinity, which is symbolic of God and the male and female divine twin souls. Now we understand where these 2 cards correlate to in the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean spiral. Let us look at these cards and the information encoded within them in more detail. As mentioned before, the first card is the Magician, and this card is symbolic for the divine male twin soul in the ethereal form. At this stage, the divine male soul, as with the divine female soul, still only exist in the ethereal state and have not yet burst onto the physical plane. The Magician stands behind his table with his tools that are symbolic for the skills and abilities he has at his disposal. For in the ethereal form we have access to much more power and knowledge as we are closer to the divine. Above his head is the infinity symbol, showing he is immortal, and there are also 8 red roses at the very top, symbolizing God's infinite energy. For not only is 8 symbolic of the immortal soul, but also infinite God energy. And it is no coincidence that the number 8, when turned sideways, represents infinity. For many numbers are not just relaying a numerical value, they are also a symbol within themselves. We see that the Magician's left hand is held up towards God. He is holding a scroll which represents the Torah and is symbolic of divine knowledge. His other hand points down to the ground, showing that he brings this knowledge with him to be manifest onto the physical plane below. The word Torah comes from the Hebrew root yara, which means the mark or the law of God. Notice, however, the Torah scroll is unopened, for this is symbolizing that although he has this knowledge within him, he has no real understanding of it, for it is the divine female twin soul, the high priestess, who has the understanding for this divine knowledge. And we see this symbolized by the Torah that now sits open on her lap. Before we look into the other symbols shown within these two cards, let us first get a clear understanding of how the divine male and female twin souls must work together to unlock the divine knowledge within them, and how we see this shown repeatedly in mythology across culture. In the Kabbalah Tree of Life, we now know that the first Sephirot, Kether, represents Orion and God consciousness. So now we see the following two Sephirot are called Chokmah, which equates to wisdom, and Binah to understanding. Chokmah is representing the magician, and Binah represents the high priestess. This is also why we see the positive energy force related to Chokmah, male, and the negative energy force to Binah, female, as these are the characteristics of energy connected to the male and female. However, it is at this point I must stress that positive and negative energy do not equate to gender. The attributes of energy are just one aspect within gender. Unfortunately, many fall into this simplistic understanding of gender and use it as just another label, equating it only to left and right brain hemispheres or positive negative energy. And it is unfortunate to see many who never move beyond this simplistic understanding. Now, when we translate this to Christian mythology, we see that Jesus is symbolic for the divine male twin soul, and as the magician shows us, he is the receptacle of divine knowledge, and as such, he is the Ark of the Covenant. When we look to the Gnostics, we see that they revered Mary Magdalene as a teacher and called her the Holy Grail. We often see Jesus referred to as the Son of God, and this is because the divine male soul has a part of God's divine knowledge within him. This is also why he is called the Lamb of God, for this is representing a part of God being brought back to the divine male when the light of Orion, God consciousness, returns, and he has access once more to the divine knowledge he holds within him. So now we understand why the Gnostics revered Mary Magdalene and called her the Holy Grail, for she is the key that has the ability to unlock this divine knowledge from the Ark of the Covenant, who is the divine male twin soul. However, as mentioned before, this is a theme that we will see repeated across culture in other mythology as well. Let us first look to the Norse mythology. And here we see it is Odin, who is not only symbolic of Orion and God consciousness, but also the divine male twin soul. The story goes that Odin, symbolic in this instance for the divine male twin soul, hangs from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced in the side by his own spear. This is seen also with Jesus, who is pierced in the side with a spear when he hangs from the cross. And in Mark 15, verse 33, it states, "And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour." So we see again the number 9 is mentioned in both accounts of Odin and Jesus. The number 9 is the number of the divine. It is the Trinity within the Trinity, like a fractal within a fractal. It is symbolic of the male and female divine souls reuniting with God consciousness, and shows each holds a part of the divine within them as well as each other. This is symbolized by the snake around the waist of the magician in the shape of a circle, representing the female twin soul, and the outstretched snake that sits behind the pillars and curtain of the high priestess card is symbolic of the phallus and the male soul. The circle and rod, which are symbolic for the male and female, are repeatedly seen represented in symbolism across cultures. For more understanding of this, we can also look to the yin-yang symbol that shows the male and female twin soul, each with a part of the other within them. Yin-yang is not representing energy as we have been led to believe, for energy must be absolute in its polarity. What this ancient symbol is representing are the twin souls. So let us return to Odin, who hung from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights. After this time he is given divine knowledge by way of the runes, but it is said that it is Freya, his consort, the embodiment of the divine female twin soul, that teaches Odin the magic and knowledge of the runes. However, even when we look to Odin in his representation of Orion and God consciousness, we see that he has 2 ravens called Hugin and Munin. In Old Norse, Hugin means thought and Munin means memory or mind. So here we see that Hugin represents the divine female soul's ability to understand or have thought, and Munin, representing memory or mind, is symbolic of the divine wisdom held within the male soul. It is said that Odin sends these ravens out at sunrise to fly all over the world and bring information back to him at sunset. And although he fears that Hugin, thought, may not return, it is Munin, memory, that he fears for the most. And this is because, as we will see when we visit the card of the Emperor, it is the physical attributes of the male twin soul that are more connected to the foundational characteristics, whereas the female twin soul has more of a connection to the ethereal. Due to these foundational attributes of the male twin soul, as we descend into lower consciousness, they are the first to lose the memory of their divinity. And when consciousness returns, their ability to remember their divinity takes longer to return. We see this also in the Zohar with Lilith leaving the garden in disgust because Adam no longer sees her as his equal. Once again, this is representing the male twin soul's descent into lower consciousness and his loss of memory in regards to his divinity. However, in regards to Norse mythology, it is also interesting to note that the Norse people say that their mythology is not actually speaking of past events, but is in fact prophecy. But it does not end with Norse mythology, for if we look between the many layers of Hindu mythology, we can see the god Shiva and his consort Shakti once again symbolize the divine male and female twin souls in their ethereal form. In this depiction of Shiva and Shakti, we can see that the light of Vishnu, who symbolizes the God consciousness of Orion, is shown shining down onto Shiva's head and then transferred from his hand into a receptacle called a lingam. The lingam is a container and correlates to the Ark of the Covenant. The word lingam is Sanskrit for mark, and if we remember, the Torah is also Hebrew for mark. Shiva's consort Shakti's equivalent of the lingam is the yoni, and due to it being a receptacle for the lingam, it is often mistaken to be symbolic of the female genitals. However, as with the lingam being equated to a phallic symbol, there is no mention of this being the case in any Hindu texts. Like with the divine male twin soul Shiva, there are many different aspects to the divine female twin soul Shakti, represented by other goddesses within the Hindu mythology. The goddess associated with the characteristics of knowledge within Shakti is Saraswati, who represents knowledge, music, arts, and science. Saraswati is the wife of Vishnu. Once again, we remember Vishnu being symbolic for God consciousness and Orion. So we see the direct connection of divine knowledge and the divine female twin soul. Vishnu, however, also has other aspects depicted by different gods, and the aspect symbolic for the creation of souls from God consciousness is symbolized by Brahma, and it is said that it was with Saraswati's knowledge that Brahma created the universe. Again, we see that it is the divine female twin soul that has the understanding of divine knowledge, so it is not surprising the religious establishments had an agenda to remove her completely to any connection of knowledge and intellect, and instead made her only symbolic of reproduction. Finally, we can look to Sumerian mythology, and we see it is the god Tammuz and the goddess Ishtar who are symbolic for the divine male and female twin souls in the ethereal form. Tammuz was known as the faithful or true sun, and we see again this equating of the Son of God to the divine male twin soul. Interestingly, Tammuz is also a Jewish day related to Moses and divine knowledge. The goddess Ishtar, symbolic for the divine female twin soul, was said to have brought the gift of the arts, speech, reading, and writing to humans. However, it is said that these gifts were kept away from the primitive humans, showing that divine knowledge is only accessible in a time of higher consciousness, when the light of Orion once again returns to us. It is also said that these gifts were not Ishtar's to give, but in fact she had to receive them from her father Enki first. Enki represents Orion, God consciousness. So again we see that it is the divine female twin soul that has an understanding for divine knowledge, while it is the divine male twin soul that carries it within him as the Son of God. So it seems that by universal design that no one being, male or female, has complete access to divine knowledge. Therefore, no one being has complete power. And we see this reflected in Plato's philosophical text called the Symposium, where he writes, "According to Greek mythology, humans were originally created with 4 arms, 4 legs, and a head with 2 faces. Fearing their power, Zeus split them in 2 separate beings, condemning them to spend their lives in search for their other halves. So now we have a thorough understanding for the roles of each divine twin soul in regards to accessing divine knowledge. We can begin to look further into the rest of the symbolism within the Magician and High Priestess tarot cards in the next video."
You don't dump tarot on people who are novices. It's deep. It's the book of life. It's the emerald tablets of Hermes we're talking about here, right? So, let's get real. This is heavy duty stuff. It's beautiful stuff.